Hello and welcome back to the Indian Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Raj Balkaran, and you're looking for living wisdom that you can apply to your life, wisdom that is from ancient India, and especially that in the form of story. There's so much to be said about why story stays with us in ways that charts and information do not. And certainly the great speakers and politicians and scholars and academics and presenters of the world understand, and certainly the marketers of the world understand the power of story to sway human consciousness, consciously or unconsciously. But we'll save that theme for another day when I share the secrets of story with you. Today, I will tell a story that will expand upon a theme from a previous podcast, a theme that generated a fair bit of interest, a theme about which I received a great many emails and messages. That is the theme of student-teacher relationships. I variously describe it as two wheels on the chariot of Indic or Vedic transmission. Also as two banks of the river, of the one river whereby the transmission flows. Both bank needs to be strong and robust. If the banks are weak, the river's a swamp. And if the banks are too rigid, too impassable, then what? The river's a dam. It's dammed. And so too be the lineage, pun intended. And so today I want to talk about the idea of testing, the extent to which traditional teachers test their disciples, their students, their traditional shishas, and their would-be disciples in order to vet their suitability for discipleship. Now, before I proceed, this relationship, this level of studentship and this sort of teacher is something that we don't really have a model for in Western culture. And it's extremely difficult, if not possible, to grok, to approach, to understand in the absence of meeting such a one, either such a traditional student or such a traditional teacher, or being in such a traditional student-teacher relationship. And I've seen it in action a great many times. I had the good fortune of being a traditional student to a traditional teacher, and I have the perhaps even greater fortune of having students in the modern Western context who are more than students looking for information or for knowledge expansion. They're looking for spiritual guidance. They're looking for transformation. They're looking for an embodiment of the teachings. And some of them are even looking for tools towards passing along those teachings in time. And so it really is difficult to understand that dynamic because it is more than knowledge expansion. It is more than counseling or life coaching or spiritual guidance. There is a deep energetic piece that is impossible to put into words. It's comparable to people who have had wonderful relationships, close, intimate relationships with partners, but however close and however wonderful, they don't really know that they hadn't been in love until they find love. And the experience of being in love is such that no question arises. You know it by the force of the experience, and you know it by the extent to which it is unprecedented. And no matter how much comfort and fun and compatibility and enjoyment there might have been with a person, if one wonders if one is in love, then one is not in love. Because the nature of love is to transcend doubt. The nature of love is, if you are in love, you are necessarily called to change or changed by the experience and the process. It's extraordinarily transformative. So this is comparable. This is an experience that I believe a great many souls have had. And so it's comparable. I'm not saying it's the same. I'm saying there is a dynamic between student and teacher that is profound and transformative. And unless and until one has that sort of relationship, one doesn't really have a basis for comparison. And by virtue of this, there are a great many people who are either deluded as students or teachers, or worse, who prey on others, individuals who prey upon vulnerable students and would-be students looking for the deference or service that is often accorded to a traditional teacher, but not really being able to provide the spiritual nourishment and protection and care and unconditional love and support that typically comes from a traditional teacher or a guru, if you will. Um, there's so much to be said about that and the trappings of that. I created a course actually. Some students asked me to create a course. It's about it's called Guru's Grace: Traditional Teachings Without the Trappings, because there were a great many students who wanted tools in terms of how to relate to tradition without falling prey to some of the trappings that are ever present, especially in the modern Western context. By all means, check it out at the Indian Wisdom School if you're interested. But why I created this podcast wasn't to send you to paid content, but rather the opposite. This podcast is so that a great many of the teachings that I enjoy sharing can exist beyond a paywall, so that you can benefit irrespective of your means. So, regarding that dynamic, it's a two-way street. A student needs to be able to vet the teacher at the outset, ask questions. Really, it's not only their right, it's their duty, right? And tradition is very clear about this. This isn't a modern innovation. Tradition is very clear that the prospective teacher is a two-way street, right? The prospective teacher should be vetted. One should ascertain whether they have the knowledge that you seek, particularly if you're looking to learn Vedanta or Shaktism or Tantra or et cetera, et cetera. Do they have the knowledge? Above and beyond the knowledge, do they have a level of spiritual attainment that would be useful or beneficial for the student? You can tell this not by what they say, but what they do, how they live their life, how they walk, how they talk. You can tell this by, if you're astute, by the luster in their eyes. You can tell this by their stance. You can tell this about whether they're jittery or wiggly, or whether they abide in the eye of the hurricane, and their posture is fairly still. They're fairly upright. They're fairly calm. Some people can pick it up in the voice, etc., etc. And so there are tells, but interaction is required, and a student has every right to vet a teacher. Now, if after a year or two a student's still vetting a teacher, that's not vetting. That's called probably trolling or mental masturbation, one or the other. But above and beyond the student vetting the teacher vets the student. Now, some element of vetting occurs to ascertain whether or not the student should be taken on as a student. But once the student is taken on as a student, actually more vetting occurs to ascertain the level of initiation in teachings that the student is capable of. Because these teachings are not intellectual teachings, they are wisdom teachings to be embodied. And the embodiment of these teachings require the sublimation or assuaging or the alchemical sort of shifting of the ego sense, right? Ego, not ego we need an ego in a general sense. We need an I sense. It is the ego that the teacher uses to teach. It is the ego that the student uses to learn, but ego in a toxic sense. And so a lot of the testing is engineered to purify ego. Sometimes the tests are very overt, sometimes not so much. Sometimes something will be asked in passing, or something will be said, a potentially offensive comment, some such thing. There are a variety of strategies. I won't get into the nitty gritty, but I do want to share that this is very common and this is very useful, because we can't be fully judged by what we say. Sometimes we have a perception of self that's not accurate. Even if we're being honest, assuming the best that we are being honest, we may not realize what we're capable of. But actions really do speak louder than words. By virtue of our actions, it's clear where we are at. right? Let's toggle back. Let's go back to sort of camera one, which is interpersonal relationships of the intimate kind that I talked about earlier. Person tells you they love you and they want to be in committed relationship with you. They might be avoiding you. Maybe they don't want to avoid you. Maybe that's just part of their relational patterning, typically from early childhood. Perhaps they have an avoidant attachment style. Perhaps the person commodifies you in a way. They don't realize that you're a trophy to them, but that's part of their psyche, their need to have a trophy partner to show off for other people. That doesn't mean that they don't love and on some level respect you in tandem with this debris, but you won't be able to tell by what they say because they themselves may not realize they have these patterns. But by virtue of what they do, if you're clear-headed and not projecting your own stuff, you can typically tell where they're at by their actions, not their words. And so the story I want to tell today is a story of a teacher named Dhaumya. This story, I believe, is from the Adi Parvan, the first book of the Mahabharata, the great epic. And I'll summarize it. I won't tell it in its full technical glory in the Adi Parvan, but essentially, Dhaumya had three disciples. Okay, and he tests them in different ways. I'll actually tell the testing of the more straightforward scenarios before I move on to the one that I find the most intriguing for a variety of reasons. So one of his disciples, his name is Aruni. Okay. And, Dhaumya asked Aruni to perform a service. Yeah, he said, there's a breach in the dike, and he asked Aruni to go and stop the water from flowing out of the rice field. Okay, so Aruni takes his guru's orders very seriously, and immediately he goes out. You respect your teacher, you respect what they ask. They typically ask very little for their personal needs, and they're asking you to do some service for a greater purpose, or they're asking you to do something really that'll benefit you in some way. And again, it's difficult to come across such a one. And it's much easier to come across someone masquerading as such a one to use and abuse you. So you have to be very careful. This sort of deference is earned, right? Based on the person with whom you are dealing. But Dhaumya was a fully baked, awakened teacher. And so his students knew that, they trusted him, and they did what they could to abide by his instructions because they knew that part of their training would be to surrender to that process, not in a self-effacing way, not in a disempowering way, but in a way that would help them to purify the ego. So Aruni goes out immediately, and he does everything he can to try and stop the water from flowing out, but he couldn't succeed. Everything he sort of put in place to stop the breach in the dike, it didn't work. It wasn't working, whether sticks or stones or straw or whatever. Current was so strong. Everything he tried was simply washed away. But he became concerned because he didn't want to fail his teacher, and he didn't want to fail himself, and he wanted to do what he could. So what he did is he lay himself down and used his very body to stop the flow of the water. And he was successful. This worked. Now, after some time, the student Aruni hadn't returned from his errand. So Dhaumya, Guru Dhaumya, was a little bit concerned. He was naturally very fond, very affectionate to his disciples. It very much is a very intimate familial relationship. In many ways, a traditional teacher, sort of father and mother wrapped up into one. So he sent his other two students to go and find him. And they called out, Aruni, where are you? He went himself to find him. Where are you? Where are you, my child? And upon hearing his guru's voice, Aruni got up and came to him, paying reverence, bowing to his feet. And Dhaumya asked, where were you? And Aruni says, Guruji, I was lying down in the dike to stop the water from going out. There was no other means that I could find, and that was the best that I could do. And I remained there until I heard your voice, and I came because I thought it better not to ignore you or avoid you, even to do this task. So I came. But now that I'm here, unfortunately, the breach has returned. What should I do? Dhaumya was very pleased with Aruni for his resourcefulness and his kindness and his obedience and his respect, and he blessed him. He blessed him with the name or the title Udalaka. That's sort of a story for another day. But pleased by the obedience, and obedience not for the sake of not for the sake of narcissistic tendencies, right? Obedience not for the sake of self-effacement, but obedience for the sake of the surrender and the transcendence of ego for something greater. And he blessed him with knowledge of the Vedic scriptures. Such knowledge cannot take root in one who is filled with toxic ego. And so it's not, some folks read these stories and they draw the wrong conclusions because they don't have a direct experience of parampara or student-teacher relationship in a traditional sense. So they think, the teacher's pleased, his ego was upheld or supported, and he's whimsically choosing to bless somebody who's pleasing him because they're being obedient. It's not the case that it's capricious or whimsical. It's the case that Dhaumya wants to understand where Aruni's consciousness is. And the only way to do so is to devise a test and see how he responds. And perhaps a compelling way to view all of Prakriti or material creation or life, as we call it, is as a series of placement tests. People, places, and things are often recursive in your life. And perhaps, when you shift your response, those situations cease to arise. There's another student named Veda, and he too was a disciple of Dhaumya. And Dhaumya asked him to remain in his home and to be a servant there. Right? Veda did as he was told, and he served faithfully in the Guru's household for weeks, for months, indeed for years, bearing heat and cold, hunger and thirst without complaint. Dhaumya was incredibly impressed at the forbearance of Veda, who did his chores without complaint, and pleased with his dedication and his constitution, he too was blessed to receive Vedic knowledge, the complete portfolio of Vedic knowledge. Yes. Actually, one of Veda's disciples was none other than Janamejaya himself, the descendant of the Pandavas to whom the Mahabharata is being narrated. So it's an interesting lineage there. The story that I want to foreground a bit more is that of the third disciple, Upamanyu. Dhaumya actually ordered Upamanyu to go and look after the cattle. Go, my child, go, my son, go forth and take care of the cows. What a noble thing to do. So Upamanyu immediately did as he was told, and from that day on, he went every morning with the cows and watched them to graze until he returned to his guru's ashram. And he would come and pay his respects. One day, Upamanyu is paying his respects, his obeisance, and Dhaumya remarked, sometimes when gurus say things, they're speaking on multiple levels. Sometimes they're asking you questions because they're asking you questions, and sometimes they're asking you questions to see how you're going to respond. They already know the answer, or so I've been told. And so Dhaumya said, "Look, you look quite sturdy, quite strong, quite, plump, quite healthy. What is it you're eating, boy?" Upamanyu answered, Guruji, you know, as is our custom, I support myself with alms by begging for food. Dhaumya immediately said, nothing that you obtain in alms should be taken without first being offered to your guru. And so from that day on, whatever alms Upamanyu received from begging, he offered to Dhaumya first. And Dhaumya took everything, leaving nothing for Upamanyu. Now, do we think that this is because of Dhaumya's greed or cruelty or arrogance? No, 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 no. No, this is a facade to test the steel of the student. And so, nevertheless, the lad made no complaint whatsoever. He went about tending to the cattle, and after some time, a few days, close to a week, Dhaumya noticed, wow, this boy still looks rather sturdy, strong, and plump, and so he asked him, Upamanyu, um, I take everything that you receive from alms. I don't leave you anything at all. Yet you look so well fed. What's happening? What's going on here? Upamanyu said, oh, well, Guruji, I do give you everything from alms that I take. But then after that, I go out. I go out a second time and seek more alms. And then I eat that. Do we think that Upamanyu understands the spirit of his guru's instructions? Dhaumya replies, this is not right. By doing this, there is only so much food that can be given for alms on behalf of the villagers. And by you going out twice, you're taking food out of the mouths of others. This is not right. You must not do this. You must go out for alms only once. So he relented, and he did, he agreed to do that. He gave his word, okay, I'll only go out for alms once. So after a few days, 3-4 days, Dhaumya noticed, wow, this boy still looks rather sturdy and well fed and vital and energized. Clearly, Upamanyu has never taken to fasting. He says, Upamanyu, my son, I take everything you receive from alms, and you've given me your word you will not have take any other alms but this once daily. And I believe you. I trust you. That's the case. How are you looking so fine, so shining, so plump? What are you eating now? Upamanyu answered, Guruji, I'm living on the milk of the cows. Once again, Dhaumya said, it's not proper for you to take the cow's milk without obtaining consent. Do we not understand? Are we not understanding what is happening here? Also, are you not taking the milk away from the calves? Upamanyu once again, acknowledged the correction and accepted that, okay, well, clearly he wasn't seeing clearly, he wasn't understanding. He made a justification to create a loophole that abided by the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. You see, sometimes the smarter the student, the better their justifications. The easier it is for them to fool themselves and others, oftentimes. So, so he wasn't drinking milk and he wasn't eating alms, and so he was quite hungry. He went a few days like this and he was quite hungry. So, not being able to help himself, he started eating some leaves, some herbs of the field, and not realizing it, one of them was quite toxic and poisonous, and he lost his vision. He was blind, and sort of groping about, he fell into the well. So here he is, poor, blind, hungry Upamanyu, poisoned by some herbs that he ate. Now, whether we think this is sort of common contribution or this is cruelty, I leave that to you. Surely there's a moral to the story. And so Dhaumya is worried about Upamanyu. He cannot find his beloved Upamanyu. He's calling out, and then he approaches the well and hears Upamanyu calling from the well, Master Guruji, I'm in the well. I'm blind because I ate some herbs from the fields and they were toxic. He's fallen into a hole. How symbolic, yeah? And Dhaumya said, okay, well, pray to the Ashvin Kumaras, the Ashvin twins, these equine celestial healers. They're the healers of the gods, half horse, half human form. They're the physician to the gods, and they can restore your sight. So he initiated him into a powerful practice, a mantra to the Ashvin twins. And so Upamanyu is doing this powerful mantra, and pleased by the mantra, the Ashvin twins appear to him and say, okay, we can heal you. Take these herbs, these magical herbs from the heavenly realms, and they will heal you. And Upamanyu said, I cannot eat this without first offering it to my master, and he is not here. And the Ashvins told him, well, if you do not eat this, you you won't be healed. But Upamanyu refused. He refused to be swayed. And he said, forgive me, but I vow to take nothing. I finally realized what my guru was trying to teach me, and I will not consume anything without his consent, without his blessing. And the Ashvins then said, we are pleased by your devotion to your guru. We are pleased and moved by your resolve. Your sight shall be restored by our mystical power without consuming anything. And so they dispensed the Shakti, the divine power, and his sight was restored without breaking his vow to his guru. When he had recovered his sight, it's very symbolic, right? He was blind, but now he sees. He climbed out of the well. He was in a hole, climbed out of the well, and went to his spiritual master and bowed before him. Dhaumya was very pleased with him for passing all the tests he had set for him, and said, you shall attain not only the health bestowed onto you from the Ashvin Kumars, but I will initiate you into all of the knowledge of the Vedas, and all of the branches known and unknown shall be known to you, O great Upamanyu. This is a story of the power of testing, the difficulty of the tests for me to endure, and the rewards that may await us, pending how we do. Let us dispense with the mentality of a switch on, off, logic 1, logic 0. Let us instead adopt the mentality of the dial, the dimmer, if you will. And let us think of tests not as pass-fail. Let us think of them as placement tests. How well we do dictate what the next level of the video game might bring, next level of the ripening might bring for us. Whether it is a test that is designed, as Yoda designs for Luke or Dhaumya for Upamanyu, whether it is just the tests that causation in this life present to us. Let us have a look around and see what we can do with the tests, and see whether or not we end up where we started, or we are able to change our fate by rewiring the patterns which bind us to the past. I hope you've enjoyed this tale, these teachings, a fraction as much as its teller has enjoyed sharing them with you. Until next time, take good care of yourself. Keep well. Reach out if I may be of service, and perhaps contemplate the wisdom of the story. Namaste.